I need to get on the network here too.
Okay, we are now live. Welcome to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Wednesday, a very slushy, sloppy Wednesday. Luckily, we still have power. And we are here in Senate Economic Development. And I'm Allison Clarkson, and our chair, Keisha Ram, is joining us by Zoom. And she's going to kick off the meeting and welcome our witnesses.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Great to have the Natural Resources Board present, having done a lot of work out of session, but over the summer and fall, really bringing a lot of stakeholders together to bring us one of a series of overlapping proposals that I hope and believe will help us deduplicate is the word I'm using, deduplicate processes, give communities more flexibility and more certainty about the processes they're engaging in to develop the kind of housing and downtowns and communities that they need, to especially in light of the flood and in light of, what we know to be a very time-bound conversation around getting people out of harm's way. And so we're just grateful for all of the work that you've been doing. And I know this is the start of a conversation. It will help us the more we have language, or the area of statute that we need to change. It doesn't have to be today, but that's going to be really helpful going forward.
So I think today we're beginning with having a presentation on the report that you submitted and that you guys worked so hard on this summer and included us in the process, which we are very grateful for. Thank you. I enjoyed that meeting. And so it is yours. The floor is yours.
I'll just interrupt with a quick technical piece. Well, I'm not
Magali. Did you send it to her? Because Magali.
We do have a presentation. We're all set there. I'm happy to just do it. We've got printouts here, but I'm not connecting to the Zoom link. I don't know if that's an issue or not.
Let's see. I can send you the Zoom link again.
Yeah,
but also, if you have handouts, we can just follow along. Although I guess people, for Keisha, it would be good to have it, and for anyone else who's.
I just sent it to you again.
Okay. Yeah, the problem is it's not saying I'm connected.
I'll know to bring
there we go.
handouts next time.
It's okay. I think you have a handout.
Well, I just have mine to go from.
Oh, okay.
It was just such a fascinating conversation at the beginning that I didn't start getting my.
That's okay.
Thing booted up
That's
here.
okay. You never know what you're going to bump into here when you come into the State House.
Okay, I think we're going to be there in 2 minutes.
Yeah, you don't expect a senator from Ireland who's going to be talking about the Trade Commission.
And
right.
Is Taiwan.
Yes, and I shared with him our hope of establishing a New England Trade Commission with Taiwan.
Okay, I've got the link. I'm opening it up. Launch meeting. Give you the play-by-play here. Sign in. Yeah.
Thank you. So while Pete's doing that, Bonnie, you want to just give us a little background on how many people were on the task force and.
Yeah, that's part of the
Oh, okay.
Then
yeah.
But thank you very much, Senator. I'll introduce myself. I'm Sabina Haskell. I am the chair of the Natural Resources Board. I joined on December 21st, 2021. So I've been there just over 2 years. Got the echo.
Yeah.
Just mute it.
And with me today is our executive director, Pete Gill, who rejoined the NRB on November 14th of last year at 7:45 a.m. and has been very instrumental and wonderful in our organization. We're glad to have him back. He was with us for 8 years as our associate general counsel. Right?
That's right. Yep. I went to Norwich for 5 years and worked in their legal and compliance work there for 5 years, and then came back to the board. The opportunity opened up and couldn't say no. So,
yeah.
And I think we're there. I want to join without audio, I think. So we don't have that.
Can they see the presentation?
They will as soon as
Gotcha.
Magali allows them to share.
Thank you. Pardon me.
which she's such a generous heart, I'm sure she's done.
I'm not sure why.
She shares
I,
one.
I believe you join with computer audio and then you mute yourself after you join.
Right.
Okay, okay,
But now we seem to have lost you.
yep, so it's asking me to sign in, if you wouldn't mind, I apologize, usually this goes a little
Like
more
Ollie to the rescue.
We
seamlessly.
told Senator Harrison
Join
that
meeting,
we
right?
would talk slowly so she could get back
If
in
you
time.
click on the link that I sent you.
So I'm fulfilling that promise.
Here, I can, yeah,
Well, you are. Technical challenges are,
yeah. I thought it was just
Part
one
of our
meeting,
life, right?
because that's what
It
came up when
works
I
well
did
until it doesn't.
that,
Right.
so there's. Got your link twice, go here,
No,
right?
don't worry, no, please, I just want to make sure you have the room you needed.
This has never happened before, right? First time?
it's the first time for everything.
Never had any screaming echoes.
Yeah. Okay, and I think I'm muted.
She's going,
And then you join with computer audio.
Join with.
There you go.
Okay.
And then I'll make you a co-host.
Okay, great.
and then she's gonna let you share, and then you've got your
PowerPoint.
ready to go. Okay.
You're a co-host, so you should be able to use the share screen function at the bottom of the screen.
Does that work?
I think so. Yep. Don't want to go in a breakout room. I want to share screen. Can you remind me where the share screen is on Zoom?
You go ahead and write it.
Oh, right there. Yeah, the one that's highlighted. Great.
And then, yeah.
Okay. Presentation.
There you go.
Share.
Oh, you are there.
Okay,
Thank you
great.
very
Yeah.
much.
Thanks for your patience.
Apologies, everyone, but we'll get started now.
Right?
Great, and Senator Clarkson, thank you for that intro. As a lot of people know, we were asked to do a legislative report in 2023 session called Necessary Updates to the Act 250 program. And as we all know, there have been a number of studies over the years. And we are also being integrated or funneled along with the designation study and the future land use mapping study. That they're all in concert, and I wanted to bring that up right up
And
front.
yesterday we had the planners here. We had Charlie and
Catherine.
Catherine. Oh my
Yeah.
God, the two C's, and did a great job and sort of began that three-legged stool of our moving forward.
Great, I wanted to be here, but we had our Natural Resources Board meeting, so
Yeah.
thank you. And just moving on, for folks who are here, and just a little background on Act 250. It's part of our DNA at this point, 54 years old. It was passed in 1970 as a way to address the impacts of development that was going on at the time with both the environment and local government services. There are 10 criteria to Act 250, but in actuality, there are sub-criteria, so there are really 32. But throughout the 54 years, it's been a vision of compact development and then surrounded by open lands. And for the most part today, Vermont is still the same way. And that's what part of our mystique with folks who want to be here and come here and visit here and move here. Having said that, as we all know, we have some issues that need to be addressed that Act 250 can play a part in to help fix. And that is that we are short on affordable housing, and also we want to be better equipped to protect our rural working lands as well as our natural resources. And just anybody who wants to jump in and ask questions as I go, please let me know. So as I said, we were asked to do this report last year as part of Act 182. The topics were specified as location-based jurisdiction and development tiers. And when we get into a little bit more, you'll see that we're using the word tiers and other designation studies using different names. We'll come to similar terminology when we move on. Also to look at staffing and fees And then the capability and development plan, which exists on paper and has been around for 50 years as well, but the maps are out of date, and that's why the future land use mapping study is so integral, because it's going to bring the principles of the capability and development plan to the 2020s and beyond. So we approached this study with a facilitation team of a lot of great experts. I'll very briefly say it was led by the Environmental Mediation Center right here in Montpelier, and Matt Strasberg and your former colleague Maxine Grad were two of the facilitators, along with Toby Berkman from the Consensus Building Institute, who's doing a lot of work with Vermont on the subject of agriculture.
Right.
So they got the connection, Tom Daniels, who was born and raised here in Burlington.
Who I know extremely well.
Yeah, right.
He's a very old friend. I mean, that is just so great that he's giving back to the state he grew up in.
And he's a professor at UPenn and has got all this land use background. And then Jack Cortez, he's on the board with the EMC and has got land use creds coming out. Just a great team. And we put together a steering committee of 16 people that included our staff, our commissioner, Tom Little, and then people who deal with Act 250 in their professional lives. There have been a lot of studies like we talked about, but we really wanted to hear from people who deal with Act 250 day in, day out, so to speak, and they can give their perspectives and expertise on what's working and what isn't. So that was the goal with that. And then each of our steering committee members, and I should say that Megan Sullivan is behind me, and she was one of our steering committee members as well from the chamber. And then each of our steering committee members turned to their constituents, their like people, and set up focus groups so that there could be smaller focus groups that could get in depth on different topics and hear about what the steering committee was recommending and give their feedback on this doesn't work, this does work, how about this, that kind of thing. And so there were lots and lots and lots of meetings, as you see here. Steering committee met 12, 15 times, and our focus groups met, I think, 7 focus groups, excuse me, and then 4 or 5 times.
You did a lot of work in a short period of time.
Yeah. We lived, ate, and breathed Act 250.
There's no break.
Yeah.
And it's a consensus report, right? There's no minority report.
It's a consensus report.
Which is a triumph.
So the recommendations in this report are the result of consensus. So you might not love everything, but you're going, I can live with it if we can talk about X, Y, or Z. Yeah. And
there hasn't been consensus on recommendations for Act 250 in a long time, so this is great.
Well, good.
I mean, the commission that we had, a commission who worked 3 years on this, couldn't come to consensus.
It's the thing about Act 250. Everybody, it's part of our DNA, as I said at the outset. I mean, people really hold it near and dear. So just briefly, the stakeholder groups, which is our focus groups, we're representatives of environmental attorneys, engineers and consultants, planners from municipalities, housing, economic development, and environmental justice organizations, obviously environmental groups, working lands operators, and district coordinators and commissioners. And at this point, I was going to turn it over to Pete.
Sabina?
Yes.
Can you name who the environmental justice organizations were?
We had Susanna Davis and Jay Green from the office, the state office, and I'm sorry, Trey Martin. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. So just to to be clear, Susanna Davis is the head of racial equity. Carla Raimundi is the director of environmental justice at ANR.
Yeah.
So, you know, Susanna and I had a conversation about the limitations of her understanding of environmental justice versus having an expert on that in the state.
Yes, we collaborate with Carla and her team pretty closely, partly because we're part of the interagency council commission on environmental justice, and at our public meeting that we had in mid-December, Reverend Mark Hughes
Yes.
was on and offered some really strong and important comments. So
I bet.
yeah, and it's
Right.
certainly part of what we are looking toward for the future, Senator Ron Hinsdale. I think I don't want to be a predictor of the future, but I would not be surprised if at some point there's a criterion that's added to ensure that when permit applications come before commissions, that environmental justice is part of that review process.
Yeah, cumulative impact, I would say, is the way that the federal government is going.
Right. There should be an equitable sharing of the environmental burdens as well as the environmental benefits. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to pass the baton to Pete to get into some of the more technical part of the recommendations, and then we'll circle back and we'll go back and forth so you don't get bored.
We're not bored, we're riveted. And we delayed long enough, Wendy, lots
Sorry.
of delays, so we're only really just starting.
Okay.
You're right in time for location-based jurisdictions. So it
Perfect.
starts there. That was one of the first and a focus point for the steering committee when they were working on this report. So what does that mean, location-based jurisdiction? Essentially we're talking about, tailoring the appropriate level of Act 250 review for the area that you're talking about, the characteristics of that particular area. And the recommendation that the steering committee made was to have this location-based jurisdiction and have 3 different levels of that. We call them tiers, as Sabina said. There's other reports that use different terms, and we'd like to see the overall integration of that at some point. And so, in terms of integration, it's super important that we think about the mapping that's going to go into this and those designation areas, because that's going to really be the foundation of what those tiers are. So I'm going to talk very high level of what those tiers are, and that's kind of the conceptual framework that the steering committee was working on for these tiers of jurisdiction.
And yesterday it was very helpful. Catherine shared with us just an initial draft of the map of Franklin County, which was interesting for us to sort of be able to visualize some of how this would all work together.
That's great. So I'm glad you have that context. That'll be helpful, because I don't have a slide that shows that. We rely, and the steering committee have relied on their expertise to help us with that. In terms of developing, just to kind of touch on that last bullet there on this slide, making sure that there's kind of a process for the identification of these areas, and making it such that the municipalities and our cities have a voice in that process.
So ground up,
Ground-
beginning with
exactly.
municipalities, and they're making decisions about where they want to
Yes,
develop.
their land use. Yeah. So moving on, I think I did that right. So those tiers or areas of jurisdiction, the first one, tier 1. That one actually broke into 2 separate layers, a tier 1A and a tier 1B. And I'll talk first about the tier 1A. So these are kind of these planned growth areas. They'd be areas that have water and sewer infrastructure in them. They've got the permanent zoning and subdivision regulations, bylaws in place already, and then a strong administrative capacity to make those things work in those areas at the municipal level. So that would put you into the tier 1A category. What is the jurisdictional result of that? would be that residential, commercial, and industrial development is exempt from Act 250 in those particular areas.
So 1A would be completely exempt.
Yes.
And I will just throw in that that does not mean across the whole municipality. It would be sections that are appropriate.
That are identified.
Right.
So that's again
Through
where
this
that,
process.
where that mapping comes in to identify those particular areas. But that municipality has, would have zoning and subdivision regulations. And so that area within it would be the planned growth area.
So I think this is a
Yeah, if you've got questions, please.
thanks, Senator Harrison. It's hard to talk over other people, so I hope it's okay if I jump in. I'm sorry. I think this is going to be an area where the details really matter. When we look at those criteria, water and sewer infrastructure, permanent zoning, municipal planning, that could cover a lot of areas, right? I mean, that could cover parts of communities that don't want to be considered for planned growth. And therein comes a lot of social and environmental justice questions. So, you know, I'm curious if your thoughts go any deeper. I mean, I'm sure they do, but if your recommendations go any deeper in this area, I have told Charlie Baker and Catherine Dimitrick and others that I would say if there are these areas that meet this criteria, but they do not want further development, then they should not be eligible for the incentives and benefits that you would get from being a planned growth area. You're not eligible then for water and sewer infrastructure dollars because you're not using your water and sewer for the growth that can be maintained in those areas. So I don't know if that's something you've contemplated or if you're leaving that for like the designation study more so.
Yeah, I'll say two things there. One, certainly designation study again is going to play into this, and then secondly, in terms of process, and I think we've got a slide on process here too. But that it will take. I'll explain it. That it would start with the municipality bringing up their
Right.
concept of what they wanted. So it would be
Ground up.
within their control. What do they want? Where do they want this area to be? They worked with the RPC, making sure that it's in conformance with the regional plan as well, and then bringing it to a state board for final approval. But it had gone through those first kind of building steps to start off.
Okay, I've been through this for quite a while, so I'm jaded. I brought the Montpelier Master Plan. I was on the planning committee, it got voted out, and I got elected mayor the same day. So I went through it a second time. I've been on numerous housing and how do you develop housing. I don't think we found it, maybe we found a growth area way out by U32 in Montpelier. I think they've added them. But we can plan all we want, but if the community doesn't want certain things in their community, and at the same time, we've got a housing crisis that is impacting our school taxes, it's impacting our economy, we can't get things. And so what makes us think that the results this time is going to be any different than the results last time? We also have done school mergers, a lot of pushback. I've got 34 kids in my school and that's the way it's going to be. And what's the push here to make communities say, yeah, we're willing to take the risk and change?
It's a carrot. I mean,
It's
absolutely.
I'm bigger in sticks, but
it's absolutely a fundamental question.
yeah.
And something I often say is there are, the housing crisis has been decades in the making. We have all had a hand in it, and we all have to have a hand in solving it. Act 250 is, one of 5 or 6 different areas. You're totally 100% right, and we can come to the table with helping. The very common refrain is that permits are too expensive, that developers don't want to go into areas that's too complicated. Our role can be okay, we want development here, we concede the jurisdiction here. And, but to your point, beyond that, the municipality, that's why the whole, yeah.
And that's why the municipalities is hopefully the mapping and the green lighting of areas that for development and for growth is going to begin with the communities and then be mapped, and then it will be easily able to be identified where who has said yes and who has said no. I mean, so hopefully this time there's investment and buy-in with the communities.
And, you know, being
Right.
pretty new at this though, more collaboration between different perspectives for
Yes.
a change, it feels that way. And it feels like there's a lot of hope that maybe we can make certain steps forward, but
I think when we took out the criteria for appeal for character of the neighborhood, that was the catch.
That was a big
Um,
key.
yeah.
And that may help.
Yeah, and just to
Wendy.
follow up on that, the duplexing everywhere, that will have, it could have huge implications. It'll take a little while, but that's something that we did impose on municipalities,
Yeah.
which not all of them appreciated. And the parking requirements too, lessening the parking requirements.
Yeah.
Those will have long-term
Yeah.
impacts and
We hope.
increase housing. Yeah, they really should.
They should.
The ADUs,
And the
Yes,
ADUs,
those,
and-
I'm concerned that many of those will end up as short-term rentals.
well, and we can do something about that.
Well, we already have. I mean,
Right, we
already
can do
said
more
if
if
they-
we want to.
If they do them yeah, anyway, so let's let you continue, because you just have half an hour, so I would
Yeah.
love to get you through your presentation, and then we can ask questions, how about that, unless you
We're,
want to ask
we're always
questions.
happy to come back
Yeah.
too.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, you had a question?
Well, just, a ton of questions, but, limiting it to just this, the, tier 1 and tier 1A, this will, some municipalities will want this, others will not. I'm expecting that you're looking at the delegation process and as a way to,
you mean the
municipal
municipal
delegation
delegation study?
as-
That's been
as a
done?
way for municipalities to prove that they're able to do this. But one thing I've heard that we just need to be aware of is there are some things that municipalities are concerned about, like, the state permits, mostly the A&R permits, the, wetlands. So maybe you have figured that out already, or we can talk about that in the future, but that's something that,
The municipal
Yes.
We
delegation
need to-
studies should be discussed probably more fully.
okay,
But generally speaking, there are a lot of, for lack of, concerns
right,
that come up about it. And
Yeah.
we have seen this 1AB step as a way to sort of test the municipality's interest, capacity to do this
Right.
kind of thing,
okay.
before we move on to doing that. But I don't want to get sidelined
No,
in
no,
that
I
conversation today.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up.
Be
and,
happy to
and
come
so
back.
folks can
Right,
start thinking
yeah.
about it. And the play space makes so much sense to me. That makes immense sense to me. And,
Yeah.
and I'm really glad that we're looking at it this way. I do see that there could be, like, especially industrial, commercial, there could be developments of a certain size and impact within a tier 1A that you might want regional buy-in on. So,
Yes.
but we'll have that as part of further conversation.
Yes, and a lot of the comments that came up from our stakeholder groups, our focus groups did kind of touch on that you don't want to open it up so that you have a gravel pit next to your high-rise. I
Good
mean,
example. Yeah.
That's really,
Yeah.
boiling it down to but yeah.
Great,
All right, I will, continue here. So
Wow.
keep time, going. So that's tier 1A. The second section of tier 1 is tier 1B. Another area that could be designated. These are kind of conceptually thinking of the village centers with capacity to accommodate, some growth. The main difference here, I'll just hone in on that, is that their regulations, their infrastructure and municipal capacity aren't quite to the same standards as tier 1A. So it gives, kind of a stepping approach to be able to, that, all municipalities would have an opportunity to reach any of these levels that I'll be going through here. But having these different levels here will, kind of allow for something that occur in those areas, on the regulatory side, while recognizing that they maybe not quite there yet.
Right, well,
For tier 1A.
we have
So-
poor soil conditions to handle wastewater as opposed to just like, yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
yep, yeah,
Yeah, infrastructure is a major problem because right now towns can't afford to expand it, even though they have some areas that would be ideal for development. And, yeah, that's what most mini TIFs are for.
Yeah,
In the
that's-
town
That was our
septic
idea
system.
for mini
Yeah.
TIFs. So in the
Just find a
jurisdictional,
way to pay for them out of the, in the end fund.
right,
And
Yeah,
the
so-
ARPA dollars, just I don't mean to interrupt, but
and in the infrastructure dollars will hopefully help here. And it's the residential threshold units go from 10 to 50, which is great.
yeah, so you can see what the jurisdictional trigger is, otherwise it would be unchanged, from the area, from existing,
Okay,
jurisdiction.
that would allow some economies of scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So moving on to,
Can I ask
tier
a
2. another
question about-
area.
Yeah, sorry, Keisha, didn't see. Yeah.
Does this contemplate that the area of a village center could be redefined so that it's a larger area?
So, yeah, so there will be integration with the designation study, and this would be, separate and apart from existing, designations.
Okay,
But just to tag on to that, Keisha, I'm hoping that this designation studies and the map and some of this work, as we know from yesterday, is going to take a bit of time. So it strikes me, and I talked briefly with Chris about this morning, but it strikes me that for a provisional, and we talked a little bit about this, is we could add a band around a village center until we get all these plans in place that temporarily could be viewed as an expansion of that village center, like an 1/8 of a mile around, or whatever we want, to enable that for 2 or 3 years until all this work is done, because this is gonna take time.
That's true. We're looking at this as a general framework.
Yeah, you're the
Building
first
in
report
pieces.
that's fully done, but the mapping and the designation studies all have timeframes that are out 2 or 3 years. So I would hope we might actually contemplate putting a provisional expansion band around our village centers.
somewhat like a neighborhood development area.
Yes, exactly like a
Right, so
neighborhood, right,
Keep the walkable, bikeable, compact,
Right.
but that.
but allow for a little bit more
Bands-
residential,
I was gonna say the word band, so that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
yeah.
And
So,
also for flood resiliency, because things are going, in village centers, that, we were all built on rivers and stuff, and we might have to edge back.
right, and up, backing up,
Backing up, thank you, yeah.
okay.
All right, great. So I will just point out here that the jurisdictional threshold, Senator Clarkson mentioned it, residential unit threshold increases from 10 units in these areas to 50, so allowing for that additional residential growth there.
And that's the same with 1A, right?
1A would be exempt completely, so it would be
So it
beyond
doesn't-
50.
so it could be
Yes,
any
yes.
number.
So this would be, is a very, very large number of units there, but.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry.
So moving on to tier 2 here, these are your rural areas, small villages, hamlets. Most of the state actually would be this tier 2 area. And just to really simplify the jurisdictional piece, or cut to the chase there, it's existing jurisdictional thresholds. So Act 250 applying or not applying would be the same for lots and units as it is now. And there would be, in order to reduce forest fragmentation, again, the steering committee found that in this recommendation that it was important to add jurisdiction for 2,000 feet or more of roadways, driveways combined. There was a previous road rule, as some of you may recall, and that was 800 feet, but it didn't include those driveways and things. And this was a way that
Right.
The committee looked to, work on that protection, in these, tier 2 areas.
I have a question.
Yeah, Keisha, jump in.
Thanks. Was there
Yeah.
was there a minority report on that
I
section?
asked that they didn't have a minority board. It was a consensus report, which is great.
So no one raised 2555 in that section versus 1055.
The short answer is a lot of these topics came up, 555, 1055, whether or not there should be fewer triggers in tier 2 because of the road rule, but because we did not reach a consensus on it, they're not part of our recommendations.
So, I was gonna follow up on that case, Senator Ron Hinsdale.
That's okay.
Just on the 5.5, we must discuss it at some point.
But I think what's important to remember is this report is a consensus report.
Right.
So there was not consensus. So we absolutely can do whatever we're gonna
Yes.
do.
Yes.
But we should know going into it, eyes wide open, that will, of course.
I would like to
Good
hear
job.
why folks were in favor of it at some point, not necessarily
In
now,
favor of,
of the existing 5.5 rules.
okay,
Or what the challenges were with not expanding
okay,
it.
thank you.
And
No, we've been told we need, I think it's 4,000 units of housing. When we're doing all this mapping, do we figure in, can we put in 4,000 units of housing? Because,
or 40.
yeah,
Laura,
I mean,
tell us more.
we're having trouble getting any kind of medical personnel, any kind of social worker, mental health worker, teachers, police. Years ago, we had to stop requiring that the police and firefighters live in Montpelier because they couldn't afford it. So we had to give them a significant raise to let them move. That's the real crisis that's pushing this.
I couldn't agree with you more, and again, Act 250 is one part of it, and
Right.
but to your point, I think it was Copley Hospital that just closed its senior housing
Yeah.
to convert it to employee housing.
Yeah.
And I don't think most people go into business to build housing for their employees.
Not since the coal mine.
Right, right. So, I mean, it's definitely an issue, and I get it. And once again, we are here to try to do our Act 250 part of it, but to your point, there are many other players in this. Yeah,
There are.
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, Brandy.
Those parcels that are in tier 2, what percentage of the land area of Vermont do they encompass?
So it's a good question. I mean, it would be majority of the state is kind of the understanding that the steering committee went into when they worked on this. But again, the overall mapping and designation areas is going to help flesh it out. We don't have a number on it right now, but
Rough number,
yeah.
65 to 70% of Vermont.
65 to 75%.
65 to 70.
70% would be in tier 1,
Tier
Tier
2.
tier 2. But
Right.
yeah, I'm interested in tier 1.
I
What
apologize, I
percentage are we
missed,
talking
okay.
about?
Well, you did.
What's left?
Very, very little right now, but and Charlie would be better, he's got this at the tip of his fingers. I think right now we're less than 2%, maybe less than 1%, but if these went into effect, it would be around 5%.
Well, would there be enough room in the total amount
That's your
of
question.
additions to tier 1 to create the 40,000 units of housing that we need?
And that's, I think, the question that will be answered
I mean, is
through
it
this
physically
process.
possible?
Right, we tried to figure that out last year.
Yeah.
It needs to be done.
Yeah. Or we're gonna
But we need an
that.
analysis of it, and I think
Yes.
that's what the planning and mapping work is doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Is how many units
At what point
can-
would we know that? What period of time would it take for us to even understand whether or not the solution will meet the need?
My sense from that was gonna be finished by the end of 25 in the mapping work. that Charlie and Catherine discussed yesterday, because that is ground up. I mean, that's each community looking at that in a very granular way, saying, okay, we have, 30 acres over here. How many houses can be here and what could be done? So I think
in 2
it's,
years, we would know whether or not the plan that we are thinking of following will even meet the need that we have as an urgent need today.
well, it's good. I mean, in all fairness, we have no way to meet the need tomorrow. We don't have the workforce, we don't have the
need-
materials.
The
we don't-
ability to meet the need tomorrow if we approach it the way we're approaching it today.
Right,
We
but
won't meet it tomorrow, the day after, tomorrow, the day after that.
right, but in all fairness, we have invested a huge amount of money, and more than we've ever done in the last 3 years. And it's been slower process to get it all built and permitted, done. We have less than, I think, 3,000 units to show for all that work so far, even though lots is in the works.
But
It
what-
takes a while, as we
Well,
know.
what we've done is affordable, which means perpetually subsidized housing.
Well, and
We've
makes.
built housing that the incomes of the people that go in there can't afford to pay the rent to cover the capital cost of the building.
Right.
And so what we have the missing middle, the place where people that have good incomes, decent
Right.
incomes, can't find a home. Though, that's your workforce. We don't have workforce housing.
And we're hoping, I think, in this work, to go to Randy's point, to incent a lot of private development fairly quickly, if possible, once we identify the areas, which is why I'm suggesting we consider a provisional ban around some of these centers so that we can actually move forward
Well, I think the
sooner.
other thing
rather than
we
later.
need to do when we talk about provisional bans, we need to link it to what our immediate need is. And
Right.
if we attach provisional bans around areas, but the total amount of housing that can be built still does not come anywhere close to meeting what our immediate critical need is now, that's going to be insufficient and unsatisfactory.
Agreed, but it's sort of a catch-22. We have to do one before we enable the other.
I think we can get
I think
a
we can
much
get-
better number than we have now.
I
Yeah.
think so too.
Yes,
And we
before
pause. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've been communicating with Magali and we fit Ellen in at 10 just because we had a hole given the weather and the recovery task force. We can take longer on this if we need to. We just should probably decide now so we give Ellen a grace period and we hear
Yeah.
from Sabina if she can stay.
I would suggest if you were willing to stay with us, because we haven't gotten very far through your report.
9 of 18, just to give you a sense.
Yeah, so we're only halfway
through.
I would suggest, if you don't mind,
We're
and
happy.
depending on your other commitments, that we go to 10:30 or 10:45 and take our break.
Whatever works for you,
Okay.
absolutely.
I have to leave at 11:30. I have a meeting in the speaker's office.
Okay,
And
so
I
why
have
don't
to
we,
leave at, just before 10:30, I've got a radio interview.
oh, wow. Okay, so why don't we go, aim to go till about 10:30, if that's okay?
Yeah,
And then
and I
we'll-
was just gonna add, and I happened to look at the bills for introduction yesterday, Senator Brock, and somebody, I don't recall whom, put in a short bill that is, the requirements by region for housing, or by area.
Mm.
So I thought, that makes sense, if we
Mhm.
need, you only need 1,000 and,
Right.
here versus 10,000 there type.
Right,
Yeah.
Upper Valley, they've identified in our housing work in the Upper Valley, we need 10. So I mean, that's been a regional effort with Vital Communities.
Yeah.
And so we've identified sort of the rough need. They're each, and I know you guys are doing that. And anyway, thanks. I think that you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
I think Ellen's coming at 10.
No, we're shifting Ellen.
Oh, we're shifting Ellen.
And
Sorry,
in
I
fact-
misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah, well, we could go till 10:45. We could fill you in and then we could take our 15-minute
Yeah.
break. Will you be back by 11?
I
We
doubt it.
Okay, great. So let's aim to go for another 15 minutes
okay,
or so.
yeah,
Great. Moving on to tier 3. So this is an area also fairly small in size in terms of overall concept of this area. It's the purpose is to protect the important natural resources and making sure that there's necessary oversight of those developments that would go into those areas. It, again, like all of these, it's a work in progress in terms of where that location is, so to be decided in terms, but it would be based on, you know, science-based information, and the mapping are really key in terms of defining and determining those organizations. Again, we're looking at the framework here, trying to set that up, and not thinking about necessarily the, you know, the boots on the ground that will come, but not within this framework set.
And may I interrupt you? I will add one thing about tier 3 is from the stakeholders and steering committee, that the idea is that tier 3 would be roughly the same size as tier 1, if you will, and it's not like one's going to get much bigger than the other type of thing. But there are areas of our state that we really, really need to protect.
Well, and you know, everybody talks about it being steeps and old growth, but that's going to be much more than 5%, and also protecting our watersheds. So protecting the resources that we need to protect. It's not just protecting challenging areas and special. It's also protecting things that sustain us, like watersheds.
Yeah.
Yeah, important for the economic growth of this state to have these natural areas that bring people in, right?
Well, and that protect the resources that are vital to our survival,
Yes,
like fresh water.
indeed. Yeah, critical.
So I can't imagine that those will be the same as tier 1. Just saying. I mean, I'm hoping it will be. I mean, who knows? We'll see when it's mapped.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go promising that. I think that's I mean, land is what land is.
This would be almost nothing. This would be a small percentage. I'm thinking the champion lands. that
Yeah, that's a
got
lot.
bought.
Yeah.
Can't even ride a horse through there. That's totally protected. And I would see some places that would have that same kind of
That's
protection.
correct. Thank you. Yes, that's correct. I didn't say it quite right.
Is
Yes.
there a definition that would be followed in designating tier 3 areas, so that a tier 3 area is an area that contains the following specific characteristics, and then the board would vote to determine what those are? Is that the methodology that
That's-
we use?
Roughly.
Yeah, so those would be determined what those characteristics are, and then the idea in terms of process with tier 3 is that the RPCs would be kind of in the lead in consultation with the municipality or municipalities that this affected area is in. They would take that plan, review it, and then bring it up to the state board for approval.
Is that the
to
same
determine that area.
set of definitions that exist today, or is that going to be revised?
There would need to be definitions developed for this.
And revised.
Revised, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have some of those in current use. I mean, there are lots of definitions to look at.
And there'll be a
Ecologically
public
sensitive
input
areas.
process as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Keisha, do you have another question? Your hand's up, I see.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to walk through a scenario that's been in the news just to understand, because I have a big concern about transit corridors. And I know that that's part for this conversation and part for the designation report, but you may have heard about a project on Route 7. The neighbors are saying it's turkey vulture habitat, so it's currently undeveloped land. But it's on Route 7, and the couple trying to develop this land just gotten through Shelburn's process, so they are clear on the town side. And now there's the threat of them going into the Act 250 process. Would that, I mean, obviously depending on what Shelburne does, but I want to go back to understanding in Tier 1A, if there's not something currently developed there, but it's in between lots of development, is that also still in an area that would be exempt because it's developable land on municipal water and sewer?
So I wouldn't talk to specifics on that particular case, but I will say that when those areas are developed, the idea is that there's a 20-year projection of growth within those areas as well that would help, which may encompass something like that.
So do you see these areas being designated between, say, Shelburne and South Burlington and Burlington along Route 7? is there some coordination possible there?
I think what you're saying is, could there be a tier 3 where on Route 7? And,
Hard to, yeah, may have to be.
there may be, I mean, if I'm thinking about my neighborhood at Red Rocks with all the rare ferns and that aren't really found anywhere else in the state. So I don't know the answer to that, Senator.
Mike? Yeah.
I mean, a lot
Okay.
will turn on the,
Sit with that for a while.
will turn mapping.
Yeah.
I think
Mapping is gonna be
I think
huge.
this will go back to the mapping and back to the municipalities and
Right.
cities and the RPCs.
And the science part of it, that we
Yeah.
need to protect this, we need to
But
protect
wouldn't,
that.
but wouldn't like rare ferns be covered under a different permit process? Like, are they endangered or?
Well, that's it, a turkey vultures.
I think it all
Right,
comes
yeah,
together.
like-
in the mapping. Yeah, I think hopefully when we get this work done with the mapping, that we will have mapped all those sensitive areas onto and help plan for our growth, and we will take all those into consideration.
Yes, and I guess the larger picture is, could there be a tier 3 area in a community like Shelburne or South Burlington? Yes. Yes,
A micro
right,
area.
but yes.
Micro protection.
Well, the town also will map in their town planning where they're going to have open space and, how to keep things centered in a village without having it be sprawling out along Route 7.
Right, but
that will take town.
this is where the NRB would need an environmental justice expert weighing in on all of these decisions, because it's so easy to say, we have rare ferns and we're wealthy, so put all of that development, elsewhere.
Birds, I'm saying,
not sure.
not turkey vultures.
Right.
And
what we
Wendy
ought to
has
do, just speak to the transit corridors point. If we're planning 20 years ahead, which is a great idea, I didn't realize we were going to get to that point. I think that makes a lot of sense. We can plan transportation, for 20 years.
Absolutely.
And so take care of those, potential conflicts now instead of later. And then people moving in would know what to expect, and it would be logical
But
to do it that way.
And right now, our growth area is Chittenden County. And yesterday, we talked to the planners, and I said, during COVID, my mental health was, I drove around and wanted to see as many villages as I could in Vermont. I didn't see any vibrant villages.
We didn't come to Woodstock.
Woodstock is a world unto its own. I went north.
Yeah, right.
Anyway.
That's because I didn't invite you for lunch. I need to do that next time.
Anyway, right now, if we need to plan, if just say, well, we're going to give you a mile around your village to grow in. People have to want to live there, which means generally that there's employment, and that there's, or it's near employment, or there's transportation. And so just designating growth areas isn't going to mean anything's going to grow there. Right now, we're growing on the lake, and that's about
That's its
it.
own pressure. Yeah.
We are growing in other places.
We are growing.
We
White
can talk
River
about
Junction.
that.
That's a
I have
village coming. Come down and see that. That
Barry
is just-
Montpelier are not growing.
Bellows Falls.
Bellows Falls is growing. I mean, we've got a bunch of, ones that are.
We'll do a tour.
I haven't been to Bellows Falls in a few years. It wasn't growing last time.
It is now.
I used to
It
live
is.
there.
Yeah.
Check it.
Okay.
We'll do a tour.
All right, great.
Let's keep moving.
Sorry to be a task manager here.
No,
No,
good.
I'm
Good.
with you on the
We
task.
need it.
Appreciate it.
Let's keep going.
Appreciate that. So jurisdictional rule here, for these areas would be automatic jurisdiction. This is similar to our current, 2,500, above 2,500 feet, jurisdictional trigger. This is a less blunt tool than that, more, scalpel-like there. Designation process, we kind of went into this a little bit, so go quickly, but again,
RPCs.
science-based, working with the RPCs is a starting point, because some of these are regional impacts, so we want to make sure that that's captured, but certainly in consultation with the municipalities. and then having the state board reviewing that, having the opportunity for public comment and appeal.
Yeah,
I won't pause until somebody asks a
No,
question.
I would keep going.
This slide is a nice one for you to refer back to at some other point. It gives just what we just outlined right now, kind of consolidated in one slide.
Is that in the report, that slide? No.
It,
This
no,
one is
it,
not in the.
It's
I don't
not, I'm
think
just
so,
saying.
yeah.
Separate. We did use some of these slides for our public presentation of the
Yes.
report. Okay, so there's also a recommendation that was made by the steering committee for forest fragmentation criteria. So when you are in Act 250, then this criteria would apply, and it would be revamping the current 9C forest soils criteria, and making sure that it's, minimizing development impacts through site design, clustering, et cetera, making sure that those areas are well protected.
Passing it back to me.
And I'm passing it back to you, I think, yeah.
So the next area that we talked about in the study process was the operations governance of the organization. And there was almost I think it was unanimous consensus that the board, rather than operating as a lay citizen board, needs to be professionalized with a full-time chair and some part-time members. There was not consensus on whether it should be a 3-person board or a 5-person board, but that these folks would be part-time appointees. That will really help with bringing consistency and predictability and being the folks who are going to approve the tiers process or whatever we end up calling it, and other new responsibilities that the board will have. So we can take, and a new board with that appropriate type of background would be able to be more proactive in rulemaking, policies, operations, including, helping with the district commissions and district offices.
And the district commissions would stay as they are.
That is the idea. People really appreciate having that local control thing.
So I don't see an executive director here. There'd be a chair. I mean, I assume you'd have a chair. I still have an appointed chair and a hired executive director.
Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
We have, right now, we have 25 employees plus the 3 ARPA-funded employees, 2 of whom are coordinators that rove, if you will, and back up and help all the districts, south and north, and Pete's role. We definitely think that those 3 roles should be made permanent, particularly because of the changes in the new responsibilities and expectations from the staff. So another thing is that they would be able to. One of an anecdotal common complaint is that people don't know what to do when they come in to have to get a permit. We've all heard that. And it would allow us the human resources to be able to do additional pre-application meetings so we can work with you if you come in and say, you're gonna need to do X, Y, and Z. I'll help you walk through it, that type of thing. So it's not so, it just makes it easier. Yeah.
Don't you already have a sort of portal for people who trigger Act 250 and they go to the, welcome to Act 250.
We do.
I mean, I assume you have.
We have an online application system now. We have an online database. We're digitizing all of our 54 years of files finally. We're starting that. At the end of the day, people like to talk to a person.
Yeah.
I will tell you from A&R going to the permit navigator system on their side of the house.
Oh, the navigators.
Well, be that
Exactly.
as it
People
may.
like to have a buddy. Go through it.
We 5 years ago had 17 jurisdictional opinions. We've done 230 this year. People want to talk to a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not unreasonable.
No.
No, it's
It's
great.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, it's a complicated law and and it's very fact-based in terms of each type of development and how that interacts with the law, so yeah, that's part of it too.
Right.
We just talked about.
Oh, Randy has a question. Oh, Keisha, Randy has a question, then Keisha?
But just overall, in terms of the proposed changes that you're making, including the changes in government, what impact, if any, do you think this would have on the timeline in getting projects through the system and approved? Would it have any impact?
It should, it most definitely should, and we're working on those timelines and permitting goals all the time, and
Well, have you done any projections or any planning as to, in effect, if you do all of these things, what will be the result?
We have not done something that direct, though,
No.
I'll answer that squarely. But I
Is that
do,
something you think is important to do?
but yes, I think that's a good idea. I think the governance restructuring certainly helps with the overall operational efficiency of the organization, and additionally, the positions that we're requesting here as well, I think gives more resources to the organization that will help with timelines for sure. Especially
I
in light of
think
changes
certainly
in a
it would
structure.
be particularly important to me in knowing, is this something that I support, if I know what the end result is planned to be, and will there be anything that will be, quote, I know there are different opinions on that, better than we have right now? What will we achieve by doing any of this?
there would be more oversight of timelines, absolutely.
Mhm.
There'll be more rulemaking and policy directives that will provide consistency across all 9 districts.
Mhm.
I definitely think it will help.
And clarity. I think
Clarity,
there's
yes.
going to be, just my sense is, once we finish with all 3 legs of this stool, the mapping, the designations, and the Act 250 piece, that we will finally have real clarity, enable more development in focused areas, and I'm very hopeful that we will.
There's another wing in there, which is A&R permits.
Yes, and
It's
then
not just Act 250, there's a
Right.
whole, and
right, well, we
they
can.
leave a lot to be desired.
Right. So that's another set of recommendations that needs to happen. But at the moment, I think these 3 legs are just, I think it's quite exciting, and we're getting at exactly some of the concerns that have been voiced over the last several years in the legislature. So I think we're moving forward in a pretty productive way.
And I was just gonna add to Senator Brock's question. Right now, we're working on guidance right now about completeness determination, which means is your application complete? And that is gonna be very helpful as well, just to expedite the process. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just also gonna say too, I mean, with all respect to the current board that we have, having a dedicated board with, some part-time members and a full-time chair, I think is really gonna help on the policy and implementation direction for the organization. Certainly that's a role that I play in my role, and Sabina plays in her role, but having a dedicated group that can really make those decisions, help make those decisions, I think is going to be critical to making the organization work better, which is certainly one of the goals. And if we move on to the next.
Keisha, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, this might help with this. I wanted to see, well, first of all, back to the jurisdictional opinions. I think that's partially the success of the HOME Act. So I'm hoping we schedule you back to talk about those jurisdictional opinions and, what the outcomes were, because I think that will inform our work this year as well. This might, my second question was getting at the pre-application process, because I've heard a lot of folks say that the pre-application process can be very onerous, inconsistent, and opaque. So just hoping you can touch on that as well, unless that's fully A&R.
No, certainly, and we can certainly, happy to touch base on that. we do a number of different things to try to make that process the best that we can. I think COVID's put a little bit of a wrench in how we operated, and we've been getting back to understanding the importance of having those pre-application meetings. I've attended a couple of them personally to help with that process, and I think that that has been helpful in terms of making sure that our staff understand the importance of those pre-application meetings. And I have certainly heard indications where consultants, other developers are happy and encouraging of these pre-application processes.
Right. Okay.
I will just bring up one thing about our budget, just briefly. We are 80% fees and 20% general fund. And if, in fact.
What is your budget? I mean, just while we're on it.
Our budget in total
Yeah.
is 3.7 and change.
Yeah.
Our
And 80% fees?
Yeah, and our GF is 713,000 and change. But if the legislature chooses to move forward with exemptions, that means that the fees are going to drop.
Right.
And
It will have an impact
it
on the
will have an
general fund.
impact on the organization, and
Have you had that fiscal analysis done yet?
we, we've submitted our budget. We did a fee study to the JFO.
Yeah.
And,
We won't know the answer fully to this until the mapping's
That's right.
done in the designated,
That's
and
right.
it's all kind of a
but
catch.
I'm just raising it as a
Yeah,
Can I ask,
yeah,
I'd like to ask for some information. If you could send us who the fees are coming from. Often they're coming from our housing partners that we're giving money to from the general fund for housing. So, it would help us make the case to our colleagues that we're often pulling the money out of one pocket to give to the other. So it would be great to have a list of who those fees came from and the amount, because Evernorth alone is probably going to come in and say they've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good
That's a
point.
great idea.
Good point. Great idea.
And then in the report, it said that there wasn't consensus on looking at other sources of revenue, but if there were other sources of revenue other than general fund that were discussed, I would appreciate knowing about that. Or did you just?
It was a more general conversation rather than getting into specific possible sources of revenue. It was just like everybody kind of nodded and went, yeah, if we're gonna do exemptions, how are you guys gonna be paid type thing.
Right.
Yeah, and we're 90% personnel costs. We
Sure.
only have 10% operations.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
so,
But there was consensus that fees shouldn't go up for those who will still be paying fees.
well,
I mean, that's what I read.
Fees inevitably will go up, but over the course of time, you can't.
we have not had a fee increase since 2015.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, just the cost of doing business is gonna go up. I can't.
The cost of doing business has made our fees go up, if you will, but we cap at 165,000. And as you know, our fees are based on construction costs.
Which is
Right.
how other states typically do
So
it.
that's a pretty
The
standard.
construction costs have gone up significantly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Okay. Keep going.
Okay, Pete.
Reducing redundancy is, of course, one of the key things we want to.
I have a question on governance, if I could just bring it
Yeah,
up,
sure.
and this might be a conversation for another meeting, but I really want to understand why, and if there's continuing support for not doing the deliberations and much of the conversation in public. I'm just concerned about transparency. I think transparency is really important. And mostly I've been on the regulatory side, but I was on the developer side for a job here in Vermont. And it was frustrating to not know why certain things were being recommended or required.
Conditions on the permit?
Yes, and but that's both at the local, which isn't in your purview, but it's also at the Act 250 level. I just personally think it would be really helpful for developers to know why they're being required to do things. And I think it would also help the appeals process, if you did have the, process or the proceedings be, maybe not necessarily on the record, maybe it doesn't have to be recorded, but just have it be public as opposed to private. And I saw statements about how we appreciate the casualness of it, and I don't know if casualness was
The
a
informality
way
of
of,
it.
yeah, the informality. I don't know if informality means not being in public, but I think that's worthy of a conversation. And so if we could talk about that at some point, I would really appreciate
Our
it.
hearings are public.
Right, but then the deliberation is not.
Deliberations are not because it's quasi judicial.
Right, but that's not, it doesn't have to be that way.
But the reason for, like, if you have a condition put on your permit, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's explained why. It's to mitigate this situation or that situation.
Yeah, happy to talk about this in more detail too at some point, but I'll just say, so we have the Administrative Procedure Act, which we follow, and one piece of that is when we have a major application, that's when there is a hearing, then the commissions are required to outline their findings. And so in that case, then they're required to put the basis of their decisions, so then the developer would have that. But for many reasons, but one of them being efficiency purposes, when you have a minor process and there is no hearing, then there is a public process in terms of putting the draft permit up onto the website. It's open for everybody, it's provided to folks so they can see that. And then at that point, then it's just issued and there's no findings that go along with that. If somebody wanted to have more an idea on the basis, then they would request a hearing and have it as a major process. So there is that distinction, understood what you're thinking about there though.
And then just the limitation on who can participate. I think, or who would likely even know that a permit is being asked. There's no sign on the property, for example, and I don't think that's a very difficult thing to ask for. But I've gotten pushback when I've suggested that in the past. But I think people driving past the property, if there's an Act 250 permit being requested for their property, ought to know that there's a permit being requested. So I just think I'd like to talk about transparency and public participation at some point in this conversation.
Great.
Okay,
Just pass back to me for a moment if we have a moment.
sure.
Yeah.
I think we've got two slides left here.
We've got plenty of time.
And this one goes pretty quickly. So one of the legislative charges was looking at the capability and development plan. This is something that was developed, many decades ago, and there's some maps that we have, but it really, the bottom line here is we need to be looking at the mapping study, the future land use maps, and put this in GIS and modern technology and get those updated and go through that process is kind of the ultimate finding here on that.
Yeah, it's where the devil meets the devil.
Yes.
We said that more than once.
Yeah. But it's good that we're doing.
Yeah,
No, I think this is all good.
great.
And then lastly here, there's a recommendation on many suggestions involving working lands, and the one that reached consensus here was that the agricultural soils mitigation ratio should be 1-to-1 for forest processing. This is the same, and I think it came out of this committee initially for the industrial parks, that they would have a 1-to-1 mitigation ratio rather than 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 that others have, or 1-to-3, I guess it is.
Can you explain that to me? Because I don't
So-
actually really understand that.
Yeah, so
Forgive me, I just don't.
So when you have a development, it goes on to a parcel that has primary agricultural soils. It's reviewed for the soil type and the benefits of those, and we work with our sister partners to help the Agency of Agriculture and Food Markets to help determine the quality of those soils, and they put in testimony on that. And generally, those things are negotiated between the developer and the agency in terms of determining what that is presented in some kind of consensus together process and gets put into the permit. The statute as it outlines talks about what that ratio should be. So if you have an acre of your parcel, it is impacted by that development of these prime ag soils.
So let's say you wanted to put a solar array, a community solar array on prime agricultural land.
You can do.
Yeah. So
You can do that without a permit.
So that would be
Okay,
in the,
but
in the
something-
PUC land, but
A
your
development
store or
some-
whatever. Yeah,
right.
yeah. So you put it onto the prime ag land. Now you have
Then you have
you're
to-
utilizing that acre of prime ag land. You can either do an on-site or off-site, and there's rules about how that works and when the commission can use flexibility to allow for off-site certain circumstances. I could go really deep here, so I'll try to keep it as overview as possible. But essentially, right, you're taking that acre out of commission.
So you're gonna have to
It's
put
not
something else
usable.
into commission.
So you
to-
put something
tit
else
for
into
tat.
commission,
You
yep,
basically
and
have
you
to-
either do that as one for one, like, oh, you got 1 acre here, you got 1 acre here. You do that for industrial parks, for example. For other developments, it might be, oh, you do 1 here, you're taking 1 here, and now you do 2 over
Okay,
here. You
right.
put 2
Okay.
in terms of the money in the pot for that.
How does that work? Because I'm gonna take over a quarter an acre I own, part of a project. I have to, my understanding was I basically had to buy an acre of land somewhere else to preserve it. But where is all that unowned land? That, I mean, I really the feeling the money was just going into the pot because I don't.
It goes different ways. So there's an on-site and an off-site. So if you're taking a quarter acre of your acre, you may preserve then half of that field and say that is usable.
Okay.
Those numbers may not quite pan out, but for exemplary purposes, then you would keep that on-site, and neighbor farmer comes over and he hays that every whatever, and it's being used, right? Or the commission may have made a determination, said, that's not really feasible land for that, and we're gonna allow flexibility here and allow you to put money into a pot. That goes over to the partners over at the agency, and they determine where, oh, there's a farm here for sale, and then that's gonna be used for, some of their programming in order to help with that, the purchase or preservation of that farmland.
So it is going into a pot that someday
It can
you
be,
go into a conservation trust, you buy it.
yep, it can be either on-site, like I said, or it can be off-site, in which case it's money and it's fungible going to
And it
other
goes to
areas. Yeah,
VHCD, right? They oversee that?
yeah, I think they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's who usually
Yeah.
does the trust.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So, my computer just up and died, so not sure what happened there. I hope you can all hear me okay.
You're fine. It's just we see less of you on the phone.
Okay. I think that's okay. So kind of a question / comment, and I think we've definitely given you some homework for coming back in the transportation corridors, the fee structure and who's paying it, the JOs, et cetera. I will just say I would like for the next iteration as well to be flood responsive. I think one of the main reasons that we would see people exempting otherwise tier 1A or B from development is because it's in harm's way. It's directly in a floodplain. But in many other instances,
I would like to see a proposal to create friction around where exemptions occur from development in tier 1A and B, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want a community to not have a check and balance against those environmental justice concerns and who's being placed shouldered with more of the burden. And the state has to be the check on that. So just a more refined understanding of the friction in getting an exemption from development in otherwise highly developable land.
Yes, inevitably, and the mapping, we would hope that the mapping would also reflect the flood resiliency work, which we hope every community and the river corridor work that we're expecting will be mapped onto this, because.
And then I have a flood.
So I would hope, Keisha, just to build on your comment, you're absolutely right. I would hope that in downtowns and village centers that are really on the rivers, that we would be, that some of that land that you're right, we're exempting is now of no value in the future, and would be accounted for in those maps, and hence the provisional swath of developable land around those village and downtown centers is, I think, going to be really important, because you're right, we can't exempt land that now we're also on one hand making worthless. And so I think that's a terrific point, and hopefully it will come together as we progress through this session, and those maps will reflect that.
Well, what might be interesting, we have many of our villages and cities are in a river corridor, because we've got steep slopes and valleys.
Yeah.
And then we have prime ag. So where are we allowed to develop at this point? Unless we're gonna hang things over the mountains like California. We have very, very little, and I think that's gonna have to be a serious discussion, because it's nice to say you can do it if there's no place to do it.
Right, and that goes to Senator Brock's conversation and
Yeah.
and what we talked about at the end of the last session about actually counting how many we can do, and we've got to be able to do just a rough estimate and then get it
Or scale back some of our other. I mean, if there's a finite limit to how many people we can have here,
right,
we should know that.
But infill is tremendously effective. We're finding that in Bellows Falls, in Brattleboro, there are buildings, empty buildings that are now being used. One of them's going to have 130 units, the SD block. It's amazing what you can get in.
Yeah.
And it's already a walkable community, and it makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to have a future question about existing Act 250 permits that, well, there's a lot of questions about those, right? But just recently we had a conversation about flooding that was potentially caused by or from a property that has an existing Act 250 permit, and it's very possible that the flood assumptions and the water assumptions that were made when that permit was developed are not accurate now. So there's more water going onto that property and then spilling, downstream. So can we open up an Act 250 permit to adjust for that?
The holding pond, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the size for the rainfall 30, 40 years
exactly.
ago.
And I don't want to name, because that's just one example, and there must be others. So how do we, hopefully you've been thinking about that, but we can talk about it at a future meeting.
That feels like a statute change.
It may be, but tell us.
It's a challenging issue, because, it's.
Like, if our reality has changed, and if the assumptions that were made were accurate then, and they're not accurate now, and it's causing damage.
Currently, there is not a mechanism in the statute that will allow us to reopen permits that are final, and they're not proposing any changes. The way that we get involved generally is when there's an amendment to change, particular process is not outside influences or impacts that are changing that, whether it's traffic or flooding or
Right.
others.
Right.
So-
Some permits do have a re-up, like a 10-year cycle. But,
There may be conditions.
but we might not want to
Exactly.
wait either.
Yeah.
So if we can just talk about that.
Yeah.
When we
Yeah.
see you again.
Yeah.
Right, and the transparency piece.
Yes.
Great.
So
Thank you
There
for all
is,
this
well,
great work.
I think you've made a huge amount of progress, and thank you so much for the work this summer and for your openness and I think these are some good solutions
Thank you
you've
very
come
much
up with.
for having us, and we'll be back as many times as you want us.
Good.
Remind me where your office is.
Excuse me?
Remind me where your office is.
10 Baldwin,
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
Easy. Great.
or down the street.
Any other questions? Keisha, any other questions?
No, just, thank you for all this great work. I think I'm wondering if we should take like a 10-minute break now and then have Ellen in the witness chair and then not have a break later. I feel like maybe a break could be used now in the middle of the
Well,
morning
we'd only
more
have
so.
Ellen. I've asked Moore to come back to 11, sorry, to just shift as we shifted
Okay.
I haven't heard from,
Nora is potentially stuck in House General and might not be able to join us.
okay, great. It's at all?
She was supposed to testify 15 minutes ago and hasn't been.
Okay. So,
It sounds like that maybe
Why don't we
more is
take a-
delayed, so we could just have Ellen as long as
That's
we
okay.
can have Ellen. Yeah.
she was originally scheduled for 11:15. So, why don't we take a break now and then have Ellen in maybe from 10:45 to 11:15 and see if Maura will be available to join us. Great.
Is Ellen talking about?
The whole, about our, just the initial housing bill
Okay.
as it stands at the moment,
Mhm,
which is, it's just the beginning.
mhm.
So thank you, and obviously you guys will figure heavily in this bill, so.
Yes.
we
I think there's a
appreciate it.
placeholder in that
Thank you.
bill for you all. So just as long as there's some
Yeah.
consensus in our committee that this will be in the bill, then this is in the bill.
So thank you.